So for those who are watching this on the recording, I'm Elizabeth Hamblet. I'm the author of 7 Steps to College Success, a pathway for students with disabilities. Thanks. And I am joined here tonight by my GAP expert friends. If you want to hear more about what they said about looking into programs, you can look to step 5 of my book. And with that, I will turn it over to the two of you now.
Well, it's always great to catch up with you, Elizabeth. I'm glad we had some time at the start and just to banter together as parents ourselves, right? All of us, and as kind of people who've been working in education and largely with students with different kind of learning skills and challenges. It's so rewarding to connect with you in this format to help be a bridge for families who I know can sometimes feel like they're at their wits' end, including us, parenting a young adult with some extensive learning challenges. And how do we help them feel empowered and intelligent and seen and safe and like they can do everything else their peers can, and keeping that momentum and those doors open is such a big priority for all of us. Our expertise really does lie in the gap year space, and Elizabeth is really in the learning disability space, but we do come together in this wonderful way. So just briefly, you can see sort of a visual timeline here, but Jason and I have been working now in what we call experiential education, gap year education, which has tentacles out into wilderness and in international education for 30 years now, since I led my first program in my young 20s. So, and Jason's right up there with me. And we've known each other for a good 20 plus years now through that journey. And we both had hugely profound gap experiences during our college years. We actually both paused during college due to some kind of academic boredom and burnout, and found that our gap years really reinvigorated our sense of self, our love of learning, and met many years later, but our stories are quite parallel. And for both of us, the gap years we took, the exposure to mentors and real world learning really opened up our minds to a path that led us both to instructing students on programs, directing a national nonprofit that took about 400 volunteers overseas annually. And now we've been gap year consulting for about 14 years now. So we've really moved over 3 decades through a variety of roles, all the while with the student at the center of our interest, which is really looking at every unique student, every unique learner, every unique budget, and really trying to help students cross this threshold of kind of a high school graduation, and really consider the breadth of opportunities that exist that will, again, help them continue to feel inspired about learning, confident about learning, able to leave home and comport themselves with levels of independence and success. That is what we're all rooting for. So that's a little bit about our history, and we're going to guide you through a handful of slides here and talk a bit about how you might begin this conversation or further this conversation in your family.
To begin, we feel it's important to have a shared language or definition about what a gap year is, and ultimately maybe what a gap year is not. And I'm lucky enough to sit on the board of the Gap Year Association, which is the national accrediting body here in the US for gap year programs. And we've been really working hard on revising the definition. And the current working definition that's in revisement is essentially that a gap year is an intentional period of time that an individual takes for personal growth and exploration, and is usually manifested through experiential learning opportunities. And so within that, there's a lot of phrasing, but the core of it, the root of it, the heart of it is that this is an intentional period of time, whatever amount of time one has, and we'll get to that in a moment, in order to get out there in the world, to be able to learn and to grow through hands-on, more experiential ways. And so for Jane and for me, over these many years now of gap year consulting specifically, we've seen students who have 3 months of a summer after they graduate from high school. We have students who have January admissions from college, and so they might have 6 months after they've graduated from high school to take gap time. Other students who take closer to 9 or 12 months, and some people who have slightly more open-ended timelines. We've seen students spend their entirety of their gap year out of this country, traveling all over the world. And we've seen students spend the entirety of their gap year in this country, maybe not even leaving their home state, but again, finding ways that are unique for them to step out of what's comfortable and what's typical and to move into a space of learning and growth. We often call that the stretch zone in our field. Whatever activities one incorporates in, this is meant to be a powerful learning experience. And we often talk about a gap year as really being a bridge year. It's a bridge between wherever you are in your life in this moment. Maybe that's as a high school graduate. Maybe that's someone who's in college thinking about taking a little time away before they go back to school. Or maybe it's someone who is finished with college and is looking to go on to the next step of their professional development. But this is a pathway. It is a, bless you. It's a bridge between where you are now, and that path is meant to be a part of that educational journey, but it has a final destination. And whatever you've deemed that destination to be, this is meant to amplify your opportunities of success once you get to that space.
Yeah. And this definition is so important, particularly for this audience tonight, because we come into the gap year conversation often with a lot of assumptions. We've gathered information from what we've seen in other neighbors or relatives or the graduating classes ahead of us. And you might be looking at your kid thinking like, my kid is just not like that kid. And so I'm not sure that it's possible. And that's why if you really step back, any single one of us could fit ourselves into this definition. We're not talking about an IEP or 504. We're not talking about a specific disability. We're not talking about, at this point, a certain length of time or a budget. So we're really wanting the definition to really be focused on this idea of it being an intentional break, that we're really leaning into this opportunity as that bridge, as Jason talked about. So if personal growth is the goal, that's a brilliant reason to consider a gap year. If your student isn't desiring or able to apply to college simultaneously of finishing high school and needs the gap year to do the college process and do that growth, that's also really brilliant.
Can I ask a quick question? So I know you're very intentional and you're using the word intentional. And so it feels like there's another piece to that. Is there something that you're going to address in the future, or can we take a moment to say like what's non-intentional and how does it work when it's not intentional?
I heard a phrase recently. I sat in on a high school senior year forum, and I hadn't heard this phrase before, and I'm sure it's been out there in the world, but a gap year is not a nap year, right? So it's not about,
right. I haven't heard that one either.
It's not about hanging out in your family's basement, playing Xbox and just letting time pass. It's not about not going on to college. A gap year is choosing to do something, even if that is choosing to work for the whole year, even if that's choosing to spend time with a sick relative, even if that's choosing to go and take classes somewhere that are not necessarily the four-year institution you're going to. There are a lot of ways that a gap year can manifest beyond the incredible programming that's out there. And there's an incredible array of programming beyond all the thousands of volunteer experiences or internships you could engage in. A gap year is meant to be something you are choosing. It is active. It has to be chosen by the gapper, and it has to be pursued with a level of real interest, vigor, intention. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. All right.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you for bringing us back to that.
Yeah. And, we've compared it often to kind of the European gap year, which often is associated with being a bit more of a party. I'm sorry for making generalizations. It's not fair to anyone, but, and the American gap year has kind of come out in the last few decades of bringing more of an agenda. Like we really, and I think that's what really distinguishes the American gap year concept from Europe, where there's a real natural and significant break before university and before uni. And so students take time, and they travel and they party and maybe they volunteer. And I think there is a bit more of this agenda from the American Gap Year, that intention of like, I just want my kid to grow. I want them to get fluent in Spanish. I want them to address their mental health, whatever it may be. So again, there's just some thinking beyond just often having a great time. And we're all for having a great time. I think these students need to have a great time to feel great about themselves again after COVID and the state of the world. So yeah. To come back to this slide, Jason and I very deliberately stay away from too many photos because our field is beautiful, right? You Google gap year, you look at study abroad, like the images are amazing, and we've all seen them, and they're meaningful and poignant, and they're real. These are all students of ours over the years, the last 2 years here. And so this is just a great snapshot. We're not going to do a whole lot more, because one thing that always strikes me is like, all I ever see are smiling faces. And that says something. It doesn't matter what they're doing. A young woman taking an online class outdoors in between her responsibilities on a farm she's living on, or a young woman to the far left studying to become an EMT and actually working on an ambulance on her gap year, a bunch of kids piled in a Jeep in Utah going on like a backpacking and adventure course. So it doesn't matter what these students are doing if they've chosen it and they've got that buy-in. What we're seeing is this sense of joy and confidence and place and connection. And that's what we want. When we think about some of the magical ingredients for all students, and I would say especially for our students with our LD students, some of those phrases Jason and I kind of placed on the slide today. So hands-on learning, remember, this isn't an academic year. So the places where maybe your child has been suffering or struggling or feeling other, it's a great, like, gap year is kind of the great leveling playing field, because no one's coming in with this kind of intense academic load. Instead, we are learning by getting involved, by getting dirty, by pushing our sleeves up, by being immersed. So hands-on learning is a really fundamental to kind of gap and experiential education.
And because a lot of these are facilitated experiences, and what we mean by that is they have designated, committed leadership, they have a set start and end date, and everyone joins in the beginning and everyone leaves at the end, because the cohort is congruent the entire time. This is where we can start to see students really learn some of those soft skills of communication, teamwork, collaboration, resilience, really taking on challenge and building confidence. Those kind of soft skills that we all know in the adult world are highly applicable to basically everything we do professionally and personally. And then there are also opportunities to learn hard skills. Again, whether you're working on an ambulance rig or furthering your passion in horseback riding or scuba diving or photography or cooking or wilderness, there's tremendous array of hard skills, including, of course, internship-based and professional-based skills. So,
and the vast majority of experiences that we are really encouraging for all students, and again, particularly for students with learning disabilities, is to make sure you're with mentors, to make sure that there are people, inspiring people who are there kind of managing the day-to-day logistics, but they're also there to kind of help shepherd the experience and keep students feeling emotionally safe and well cared for. And of course, being with peers, if not for all of the year, for a good portion of the year, is a really important ingredient, particularly with social media, sort of showcasing what everyone else is doing back at home, back at college. It's really important, ideally even in the beginning of the gap year, the fall, let's say, for students to be with peers. So those are kind of some of the like really loose but kind of fundamental ingredients that we want families to consider in moving forth in planning their year and choosing programs.
Gap years can benefit all kinds of individuals. And frankly, I think most of us would love the opportunity to take 3 to 6 months to spend pursuing our passions or personal growth. And we know as adults that it's more challenging to do that, the more responsibilities we take on in life. But a gap year can be a huge benefit, particularly to that developing young adult who's on the cusp of their adult life, stepping away from home, perhaps for the first time, getting out on their own, taking on these skills of independence and personal empowerment. And so a gap year can really serve many different whys, as we like to say, like the motivations for taking gap time, and whether that's a student who's worked really hard and is feeling academically burnt out, whether the grades were exactly what they hoped for, or were a little less than that. Students are feeling that and feeling that level of burnout, and so this can be a nice time to actually kind of shift the part of the brain that we're using for learning and take all of that amazing knowledge we gained in the classroom and then start really putting it to work to gain the real world experience that will then, of course, inform future educational experiences, which is a wonderful aspect for many students taking on gap time.
Our experience, having worked with thousands of students now over the years, and seeing more and more reported anxiety, depression, ADHD, executive functioning, like we're all there together. And so to help students identify that they can still have profound learning experiences without some of the pressures that they felt in the traditional four walls of a classroom, and that a gap year can so successfully address. And these are the core outcomes that LD students and all students report about their gap years. We actually can't really see a distinction in reported outcomes between students with learning differences and students with non-reported. So, looking in any order, all of us can appreciate, right? Gaining some career experience because I got to take it out of a textbook and actually work in an automobile shop or shadow a nurse, or, the personal growth required that we're hoping our young adults will have to help them manage a college campus or community college or vocational school. The maturity and confidence is huge. I think exploring outside of home and hometown, even if not overseas, but getting out of the kind of bubble. All of our students will say how significant it is to get out of the bubble of their hometown, the same kids they've been growing up with, the same roles that everyone is, and to be able to kind of shed that, reinvent themselves a little bit, be known for other skills and attributes. All of these pieces are what we see as consistent benefits coming out of that well-planned gap year, and carrying with students into their next goal, whether it is a four-year college institution or otherwise. So if you identify with these, or your child does, that's great. You're not alone. These are up here for a reason. And I'll tell you that most students, when we spend some time on this slide, and if we're in person in the school or classroom, most students will report they identify with at least 4, if not 5. So there's no one reason or one benefit, because they're the same. These are both the reasons for taking gap years as well as the benefits, right? So there's no one reason or purpose or benefit. And in fact, it's really likely that you can identify with multiples. That's great. Starting to understand those goals you have will also give you a sense of what a very likely outcome will be.
And I think one of the things that's so interesting that we reflect on a lot is that of all the kinds of opportunities of education that students tend to pursue beyond high school, very few, maybe with the exception of the military, and I think this might be arguable, or the armed forces, very few of them are actually really trying to build the character and personal development of the individual, right? That is not the charge of a four-year institution. The charge of the four-year institution is to actually develop their capacity intellectually and professionally, educationally. And so this is an opportunity, whatever experiences you end up taking on, to really build those senses of character, to really set in stone more of their personal values, to establish healthy habits for living and pursuing life, and having a more balanced life that they are actually choosing for themselves, that young adult is choosing for themselves. Again, this is in parallel. It's meant to be in tandem, a holistic part of the educational experience. We're not suggesting a gap year in lieu of the next stage of education. It's in tandem with it. That's the entire point.
Absolutely. We want to do sort of popular questions, common questions we get, and then sort of match that below with some quick responses. So if you're a visual learner, you can read along and we'll talk you through it a little bit. One of the first big concerns we get is, particularly for students who've been receiving a lot of support throughout their academic career, what are we going to do without that academic support, without that IEP or 504? What can we expect? And is my child going to fall behind and lose study habits, right? For those of us who've been on that journey, regression, right? That's the big scary word, is we don't want to see like loss of skill. We don't see that, and we haven't gotten reports of that. And that's something that we hope research will continue to follow over the years. But what we do see, what we have seen, is that in general, gappers of all kinds, again, not discriminating in any kind of way, but that gappers of all kinds are generally achieving higher GPAs than either they imagined they would or than their non-gap peers. So again, that rich year of growth, maturity, resiliency, independence, confidence, addressing the burnout, mental health, that's the stuff that's actually leading to students performing better. It's not just the constant rigors of trying to play catch up. So in fact, we aren't seeing students lose habits. If anything, we're seeing them perform better once going on to college. And also, we always just love reporting a different study, but gappers are more likely to graduate college in closer to 4 years. And the national average in our country of students finishing a 4-year institution is actually 6 years. So a lot of families also worry that a gap year was not a year we had planned for it, not a year we budgeted for. I'm already 19, that feels really old. Keep in mind, most of your peers are going to take 6 years eventually to graduate college. So it's all going to come out in the end pretty balanced. But so just to address that academic piece, again, we don't mean to diminish the hard work that you and we have all been doing to get our kids to this point. But from our own experience, we've just seen absolutely no evidence that students will actually fall behind academically by planning a productive gap year.
Yeah. And, this year is meant to be a stretch, right? There are meant to be moments where we're really stretching and growing, or this time is about stretching and growing, but it's not necessarily about stress. And so how do you balance quality stretch zone learning, that place where we're not always grateful, but we're likely to be successful, right? And tends to be very impactful and meaningful for us over our lifetime, that kind of learning. So how do we balance that so that we can have that moment of stretching outside of our comfort zone, but also not get so stressed out that we aren't able to actually integrate that learning? And so there's a few things, and particularly for students with learning differences, the gap year is quite successful, particularly because there tends to be a very small ratio between the number of students and the number of leaders. So usually it's about 6 students to 1 leader per program. So you might see a program, 12 students, 15 students that would have 2 to 3 leaders on it. So there's a very high touch sense of personalization on these programs. Leaders are going to be in touch and in contact with students very regularly, checking in on students, talking with them about their well-being, making sure that their students are meeting their goals, supporting them with tools if they aren't meeting their goals. So this is a very positive aspect of gap year programming, something that we really love and the field takes a lot of pride in. Additionally, a lot of the things that are skill sets that students are really learning to do for the first time, living in a house with other people, learning how to cook meals, doing their own laundry, these are things that are generally a part of the experience. So if they're not included fully, as in someone is cooking for them, students are learning how to cook with the supervision and support of somebody who is a professional culinary expert. And so that is amazing because students are building skills, but them eating is not reliant upon whether or not they can successfully pull off that meal that night, right? It's really going to be under that level of supervision and care. And as students grow in their skills, then of course, students have a bit more independence and freedom. And that really ties into that third point, that emphasis on personal growth. That's what these programs, these experiences are all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so moving on to that third column, which really works so well with a lot of what Jason just shared, is starting to think about, so many gap year programs are inherently so well suited to students with learning disabilities. It's actually just amazing. They will get more hands-on care than they would at college. I think it's safe to say. And we don't think about that, but these programs are about the growth of these young adults. They aren't about grades and performance. It's about engagement. Students aren't going to get lost through the cracks. They're going to be held to high standards. There's going to be really respectful dialogue and process. We just were on an industry-wide call this today at noon, and someone was reporting, like, watching students come so far with their time management and managing their bags and showing up to meetings on time. Like, this is stuff that all these young adults are working on. And the gap year is such a great opportunity for them to be invested to be successful. And that's the difference. I can't even say how many families are like, well, my child, isn't that motivated unless it's something they're really passionate about. I'm like, well, right. That's kind of all of us in a way, right? So these gap experiences give students something to feel passionate about, often far more than what they might be faced with day to day in school. So assessing programs, what should you be thinking of? What kind of programs will be best for your child? Some of the phrases that Jason and I think about that we want to impart, thinking about a residential versus an expeditionary type program. And what we mean by that is we came up with that a long time ago as a way to help families understand there are programs that travel a lot, like every 2 to 4 days. Repack the bag, get on the road, take a bus, go to the new location. That works really well for some students and does not work well for others. So if you know that you've got a kid that's got high energy, wants to see a lot, wants to do a lot, an expeditionary type of program in which students are moving and don't have a set home base may be great. But if you're a family here saying, actually, unpacking the bag for 2 to 3 months, having routine, that's going to give my child a great sense of comfort and will set them up for success, then you're probably more of a candidate. Your child is for a residential program. So residential, not meaning therapeutic, expeditionary, not meaning wilderness. We're literally talking about a style of programming of, are we stable? Are we living in one place? Does that feel more like a fit for your child? Or do we want to move and be on the go? There's no right or wrong. There's just what's right or wrong for you. So that might be something to keep in the back of your mind. Programs aren't going to identify themselves as either residential, expeditionary, but now you'll know when you look at itineraries or housing that that's something that's a really important piece, right? Let's get them structurally in a program where they're going to feel comfortable and able to stretch.
And to that end, it's interesting to think about even residential versus expeditionary in terms of communication, right? If you live in a house that has Wi-Fi, it is likely that you're going to have much more access to be able to communicate home, or if you meet with your therapist once a week, that's a likely scenario that could be accommodated. Whereas if you're on an expeditionary program, there really aren't any guarantees that that program can give. There's not necessarily going to be a 1 hour block that you can carve out on Thursday at 1 p.m. every week to talk with your counselor. It just may not be possible. And so again, just thinking about what your needs are, what your child's needs are, and these are not atypical needs, right? There are lots of students who want to continue speaking with their therapist while they're gone. So yeah.
Since COVID and during COVID, we saw a huge growth in domestic programs, which Jason and I are so thrilled about because we live in a beautiful country. Not everyone wants to be overseas. So there's a lot more domestic options than we've ever had before. So another consideration for you is staying in the US a better decision, or is international okay? So those are some, we want to start macro level as you start to hone in on what's going to be right. So these are some of the broad brushstrokes, just location. And then lastly here, Jason and I have already mentioned it briefly earlier, but soft skills versus hard skills, it kind of comes back to what is your why. So what are some of the goals from the gap year? And so for some students, it's like, I want to get fluent in Spanish, or I think I'm interested in environmental science, but I'd love to see what that looks like outside of the classroom. So more of those hard skills. And for other students and parents, it might be like, I want to really learn. I want to feel more confident. I want to address my anxiety. I want to feel like I can manage living independently from home. So developing more of those kind of soft skills. So where do you fall? Where does your child fall with some of those goals? So those are some of the kind of broad brushstrokes to help you start to at least sort out. That means you're going to rule 50% of the programs out. If you can, even if those 3 subcategories you feel like you've got a clear resonance with, then we know to take certain ones off the list. That's going to really help reduce that kind of overwhelm of research.
Yeah. If you're thinking about this and you're a potential gapper, or you think your child could be a good gapper, there are a few steps to take. And each one of these steps right now is actually a very distinct chapter. We don't blend them together. We would encourage you not to blend them together. The first step is really allowing the potential gapper to have a dream list, right? And this is not something that you as parents are involved with, or family members and guardians who are involved with. This is a chance for that student to sit somewhere quietly with pen and paper and to write down, if I could go anywhere, where would I want to go? Or if I could learn to do any kind of skill, what would I want to learn? Or if I could be in any kind of environment, like what are the places that draw me? We want this to be big. We want it to be bold. As adults, we might look at this list and in our minds be like, oof, I don't know about Nepal, or I don't know about you learning to do blah, blah, blah. But we're not going to say that right now, because right now this is about planting seeds, letting your young adult get excited about this. There's likely a happy medium that can happen between their ideas and chapter 2, which is you as adults being able to say, okay, like, I see this amazing list you have. That's so great. You're excited about X, Y, and Z. Here are a few of the parameters we have. And that might be, the fall, we'd really like you to be in the US, or here's our realistic budget. So it's great that you want to travel to all these places, but like, we have to be realistic. You might have to make some tough choices. Or here's what I need as a parent, because, I see that this is hard for you to get up every morning. So I need you to be really committed to some goals. Can we set some shared goals together? That's chapter 2. And then chapter 3 is really taking in now some of this research that Jane was talking about and starting to connect with various programs or organizations. And we cannot encourage you enough to be fully transparent about who you are as the potential gapper, or who your child is as the potential gapper. These programs are not looking to eliminate students as potential candidates. Almost every single gap year program is enrolling based on a rolling admission for qualified candidates. So a program cannot deem whether or not they can support you as a qualified candidate if they don't understand who you are. If you have ADD, it's okay. They've seen 1,000 students who have ADD. If you're working on your executive functioning, great. So is half of the student population that's applying to that program. If you've been on anti-anxiety medication, no big deal for most programs, right? If you're a diabetic, okay, we really need to know about that, because we need to see if your insulin needs to be refrigerated and if we can accommodate it, right? If you have a history of being in a therapeutic residential program, you need to be transparent, because the programs need to be able to say, hey, okay, great, tell me more. Here's what we can do. Here's how we might be able to accommodate you. Or actually, we don't feel like we can accommodate you, but here's some other great organizations that probably would be a better fit. Again, this field is made up of highly compassionate, empathetic humans who just want to see something great happen for your human. So please be transparent up front. Otherwise, problems end up happening later on program, and that's not great for anybody.
Yeah. This is sort of one of our last slides, and then we have 2 example students. So I know we've been talking a lot, but so taking all this information that we've shared and trying to then sort of showcase how you might plan a full year, because that's also really daunting. If you've looked around at all, you may recognize that there are very few year-long programs. The vast majority of programs run the range from 2 to 3 months. And then frankly, you could do experiences that are 2 days or 2 weeks long. So it's a lot to look at. And so what we want to impart here is this concept of planning your gap year in a progression, meaning we want to start the year with the most supportive experience, the most structured experience. And if there is an interest or desire to explore a little bit more independence, stretch one's wings, well, that's a great goal and one best placed towards the end of the year. So if you were to look at these 3 columns here and even place in your mind the words fall and winter and spring above each, we can look at the gap year in almost trimesters. So there's that first experience. It's the most structured, which means there's housing and meals, there's a group, there are mentors. These are programs that are going to be definitely working on life skills. There's probably levels of travel, whether it's domestic or international. There's thematic content, whether it's community service or cultural immersion, or there's some, some interests that are bringing the group together. And that's a really profound starting point, because that's where we get the buy-in. That's where we get all the support that students really need, and support that leads them to developing skills that they are able to access in each subsequent experience as the year goes on. And that, if the formula works and it feels right for you, means we can start to slowly pull away some of the scaffolding. And Jason and I often bring in the metaphor of a student learning to drive, right? So did we send them right out on the highway in that most independent, least structured experience? Absolutely not. We started in driving school, and then maybe driving, the dirt roads in Maine by grandma and grandpa's house, practicing who knows what. I was going to say stick shifting, because that's what I did, but I don't think kids are even really learning how to drive manual anymore, but I don't know. I'm not there yet. Thank God. But in the same way of driving, like, we're building towards that place where, even though we might be a little nervous, we know we've done everything we can to set them up for success. And this is no different. A gap year is not going to be successful if we drop our kids in the deep end right away without having taught them the skills to tread water. So keeping that metaphor in mind, starting with that most structure, there's all these skills that students can draw into the next experience. So maybe in that winter or that second experience is a little bit less structured. Maybe there's still housing and meals, but maybe there's a little bit more independence. Weekends are free. Or, students are allowed to have cars on the program. I don't know what it could be. It looks like a lot of different things, but it's not quite as much as like check in, check out, 24/7, the group is together. And then again, leading to that very final experience, maybe it's the spring, it's the least structured. And this is a time where we see students maybe getting in the car and driving to visit other friends on college campuses, doing a little road trip in the US, or maybe backpacking in Europe, or being an au pair and living with a family.
Or having a job, living in their
Or
home.
having a job.
Yep.
And it could be any number of things, but this is where there's the least amount of kind of overt facilitation. But ideally by that point, a student's really ready. And that's when you're going to see by the end, like, this young adult is really ready for the next step of what's coming. So that's a model, and just will briefly just show you how that played out for two wonderful students.
So Zach is an amazing young man, and he actually took a gap year in the first fall of the pandemic, so 2020. And Zach was really compelled to want to travel internationally that fall. And of course, nobody was leaving the US at that time, and nobody was really getting back into the US at that time. So he pivoted and he did something that was way outside his comfort zone, which was go on this wilderness semester program. He was not much of a camper. He had certainly never climbed outdoors, and he chose to do something that was way outside of what he knew. And he had an incredible wilderness leadership semester, which he has gone on, just in kind of the retrospect, to become a student leader of those once he was at college, something that he had never even considered, and really spends a lot of time in the outdoors. Now he discovered a passion that he didn't even know he had, which was quite incredible. In winter, spring, when things started opening up, Costa Rica was one of the first countries that started letting Americans back in. And he went down to Costa Rica and he had an amazing Spanish immersion experience. He really wanted to further his Spanish language, and had a chance to do that. He did some independent travel. He did some volunteering. He did some work exchange, where in exchange for about 20 hours a week of labor, you end up getting housing and food for free, and had this amazing kind of capstone of his gap time, again, moving from those spaces of structure towards independence, and then went off to college that next fall, and really found that his experience was amazing. It was really growth filled, to the point of, his quote, "It was amazing to be able to go through these incredible hands-on experiences with like-minded peers and supported mentors," something that he really took away from that.
And Zach came to us, like, friends were a really big part. He did not feel like he had a community in high school. He was a pretty good student, but just felt disconnected. Watching him go through his gap year, and we're still in touch with him now, he's a junior in college. He attributes all of his success in college to what happened on his gap year, his confidence. He was already pretty confident as a student, but he wasn't as confident socially. And he's taken on multiple leadership roles, as Jason suggested, and is thriving in college. So a really exciting turnout. And then lastly, just to profile Emma. Emma was curious about a career in maybe public health or healthcare, really was unclear if that would be something she could be successful in. And knowing the amount of study that'd be required, and that was a little daunting. So she decided to stay home in the fall and study to be an EMT. So that's something that could take someone an entire semester when you're doing other things, but when you're, or a year, but when you're actually doing it intensely, you can get through a course in about a month, I think. Because that's what she did, full time. She passed the certifications and was offered a job on an ambulance. She postponed that job because, per our suggestions, she really wanted to be with peers. She was glad she did the EMT. She wanted to do it right away because she was nervous that if she didn't pass it, maybe she'd take the course again. But she passed all and got all the certifications, and then went on that group-based experience. So got to have that social, supported, kind of cultural and outdoor adventure program experience in Hawaii. And so that was her one experience away from home. It was 2 months long, and came back and got a job on an ambulance, which after 6 months, she felt like she was very clear that this was a career she wanted to pursue. Not necessarily working on an ambulance, but the healthcare field, and that she trusted she could actually do the work and be successful at it, which is also just an enormous thing for any kind of learner to recognize that I can do this thing. And if I can devote myself to it without anything else crowding my mind, and it's what I think I'm passionate about, and then I do really well, it really bolsters one's confidence, right?
What I like about Emma's story, because a lot of students think, oh, I have to go away on one of these group programs first. If we look at what it means for her to live at home, right, that is structure. It's something that she feels comfortable in. She knows where she's sleeping every day. She's like having, her parents buy food. So she can really stretch herself by taking this intensive course. So brilliant, right? Like she really used that stretch zone, not stress zone very well that fall. And then that allowed her to go away, which was quite far from home, right? Hawaii is about as far from where she lives as you can go, and ultimately had this great social experience, like Jane said. So again, she already is building upon her fall, and then diving once again into that most independent thing, which is now taking on a high level responsibility on the ambulance rig.
Yeah.
I just love how that example plays out.
It's amazing. And the last thing I'll say, because we've been talking so much, and I don't know if there's questions coming up, Elizabeth, but we haven't talked about budget.
Yeah.
And because we're really trying to be LD focused, but if you look at this, so Emma did her training at a community college and lived at home. So it was just not that much. She saved up her money, her parents helped. So that 2-month experience to Hawaii, is kind of pushing around a $10,000 mark. That was big. Then she came home and worked for 6 months on an ambulance. So she could, I don't think her parents asked her to, she could have fully paid her parents back. So, in a way, this gap year was almost a cost neutral by the end, right? So you can go big on a certain experience that costs more if you really plan on the work and low cost options on either side. Zach started with kind of a big program out the gate, but then once in Costa Rica was doing work exchange and moving from site to site, and basically was housed and fed for his work. So it became a really cost-effective way. So budget's a whole other conversation, but just like everything else we're saying, where there's kind of a will, there's a way. So we want to get after those goals and interests and passions from the students first, and then take a step back and look at all those realistic elements of, what's safe, what can we afford, what do you need to be successful.
One of the things I think that's interesting about students living at home is a lot of parents balk at that idea. Like, ooh, I want them to be away. I want them to be out and doing, living life, being independent. And that's fine. And the reality is your young adult is going to be back living with you at different points in time. They're going to be back living with you during the summer and during breaks. And it's a really wonderful opportunity for a student to go and have this amazing set of experiences, and then return home and understand how to integrate it back into a life that they're familiar with, a life that is going to be more typical to to them than that gap year experience will be over the next few years. And really, as adults now, everyone in the room being adults, learning how to navigate that set of relationships and agreements together, because that's something that we all had to do, right? When I came home after freshman year of college, my parents looked at me and were like, here's curfew. I'm like, what's curfew? What do you mean there's a curfew? Here's the expectations we have of you. Expectations, like I've had no expectations of me other than me taking care of myself. That was a rub. That was a friction point that we were not really ready to manage together. We had to find our way, and it wasn't actually that graceful. This is a chance for you to actually have some of those conversations in a way that will feel better, I think, ultimately, before that next step of education. So, and there we have it.
And there, Elizabeth knows we could go on and on. We're like gonna stop. And I can't see what questions, if any, you're fielding. So do you want to start guiding us with questions, Elizabeth? And you probably will answer some too, I hope.
Well, and these are really very specifically for you. So first of all, thank you as always. Talking to you guys is like a warm hug. And Jason, I've been meaning to say to you, when I interviewed you for the book, you used the expression, stretch, not stress. And I use it all the time in a variety of contexts, certainly when we're talking about college. So let's see, our first question is my senior is planning, some of these are statements / questions. My senior is planning on a gap year due to academic exhaustion and EF challenges due to ADHD and anxiety. He is struggling to be involved in the planning process because he has no idea of what he wants. He only knows he wants to stay in the US. He's not interested in wilderness outdoor programs. How can we best engage him and help him identify options he'd be happy with?
I have a few different thoughts, and one is, as we already talked about, that brainstorm, and sometimes that is a little too open-ended for some of our students when we just ask them to write on a blank paper everything that they can think of they want to do. And sometimes that is a little bit too broad. We have a whole nother worksheet that works really well for some students where it's much more specific. And I'll tell you, to the parent who wrote the question, it's basically all about what gets them happy. So our questions revolve around, what's your favorite class? What's your favorite extracurricular? If you and your best friend had a weekend to do anything, what would it be? What's the best vacation we've ever taken as a family? Who's a role model for you and why? So literally just trying to when I'm starting to try and get a student, and I know it's harder when it's your own kid, but when I'm trying to start to make a connection with a student, it's like I'm just casting out and trying to get a student to grab anything. Because once I have one hook, that's all we need. It is all we need to get started. It's like, what's one thing? Because I love that time that, our family went on vacation to Hawaii and we were surfing, and, I love the temperature and the water and the vibe was so cool. Oh, okay. So for me as a consultant, I would take that, and I'm not going to just send him or her to Hawaii, but I'd be like, well, tell me more about that. Do you like the water? And all of a sudden the conversation is going to ultimately unveil something that I think I can turn into a gap year possibility. So if just what do you want to get out of your gap year is too broad, then I try to create a list of 8 or 9 questions that just get at basically what makes you happy, but through really specific examples that a high schooler would identify with as a start.
One other thing that occurs to me, and this is based off of a conversation I was having today with a student who has a very similar, attitude towards gap year, is that, so it sounds like you've actually established together some of the whys of taking gap time. The whys are actually they end up creating the goal as well, right? The goals, whatever, number of goals a student might have. But if one of the reasons for taking gap time is academic burnout, so the next question that comes to my mind is like, okay, so what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about the burnout you're feeling now? And how are we going to try and prevent the burnout from happening later? How are we going to build those skills in this year? Because that's going to help structure and frame what activities you might choose. Getting a job and living at home might do that, but that doesn't seem to actually really manage the situation to me. That might be a different kind of learning, but how specifically is it looking at a program that might support that and might help build in learning that will apply the academics that are interesting to your son? Or is it actually like maybe taking on a lower level of academics and learning how to do more balancing your personal life, your exercise needs, your mental health, and all of that? So again, those are other areas, other ways that you might start kind of spinning these questions, looking at them through different lenses.
If I can just add one more as you're queuing up the next question, Elizabeth, I would say that it's not meant to be a shameless plug, but Jason and I do free consultations.
Sure,
Every
right.
family can schedule a free 30-minute call with us.
Yeah.
So if you can get your son to the phone with one of us, oftentimes that's where bringing in like the third party can often just help nudge the conversation just enough that you might get what you need to kind of keep moving on. So I always encourage families to get on the phone with us or somebody else that's not you. Sometimes that parent-child dynamic is it's just so stuck at a period of time that students do have a hard time engaging the process with their parents. And we often have some success cracking it open just a little bit. So, if it's not a consultant, bring in an aunt or uncle or some other trusted adult in that young adult's life that they could start. But they need permission. They really do, to be like, you could say anything and we may or may not be able to make it happen, but let's just start with like what it could be that makes you happy.
There's this ironic divide, I feel like, that happens between young adult life and adult life, where as young adults, we actually don't even know necessarily what's out there, right? Like part of the paralysis in this situation might actually be the fact that it's just like the landscape's unknown. And as adults who take gap time, it's really fascinating. Adults know a lot of the options, and we are really discerning about what we're willing to do or not do, or what we want or not. If we were given the blank palette of like, hey, where would you go in the world? Anywhere you'd want to go, I think I'd be real specific about it. And if you offered me something different, I'm not sure I would say yes, which is ironic because at 18, I would have said yes to almost anything, right? Because it was all unknown, which is a really fascinating thing that I think happens between adults and young adults.
All good. All good. And I've dropped the link for your calendar in the comments. So if you guys want to schedule that free consult, these folks really mean it. All right. Are there, gap year options where a student can go to an international program and experience some work program? My son is rejecting going to school. He's profoundly dyslexic and done. But I don't want him living in my basement. My elder son did a gap year where he lived here and had a 40-hour a week job locally, and that was great.
There are experiences where students can, if international, I heard that is a priority, that can happen, and get involved in either an unpaid internship and in some countries and in some cases paid work as well. It really depends on visas. It's pretty hard for a young 18-year-old to get a visa to work overseas, but it's pretty much easier in New Zealand or Australia, for instance, which have working holiday visas, which means you can get a visa without being like sponsored by an employer.
Oh, interesting.
There are some boarding schools and other kinds of environments that would pay a young adult to be part of their academic team. So I think realistic expectations are always so important. Transparency, as we've talked about. So going to get a job at a software company and making money in Dublin, Ireland, not likely. An unpaid internship at a software company in Dublin, Ireland, likely. Working, coaching sports and making money at a maybe boarding school in India or Australia, likely. So it's a combination of how important is it for it to be money making? Or is it just about having the work, having the exposure, the career exposure? Is that more important? If it's really more about the exposure and, of course, the commitment and responsibility of showing up every day, there's actually a lot more opportunities. But paid opportunities for gappers is a little more complicated. That's the short answer.
Okay. And that I know that parent, she can also schedule a consult. All right. My son has a passion for the outdoors and is interested in becoming a national park ranger. That's so cool.
Oh, great.
I'm interested in exploring gap year experiences in the national parks. So are there such a thing? Oh, awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, there are. Yeah.
Very cool.
I mean, one easy avenue would be to consider like an AmeriCorps-based position. There are several AmeriCorps positions that are available to individuals 18 and up. And so the AmeriCorps site is actually a little tricky to navigate, even for us as people to look at websites all day long. But there are several programs that offer students a chance to work in conservation specifically or in education related to the outdoors, and state and national parks are one avenue within that.
And designed and they're super affordable. They're stipended because they're federal, so it's kind of like our domestic Peace Corps. So in large cases too, it's great for the budget, and they are also great. I mean, they say on the website, like, these are great experiences for students who actually are potentially interested in a career working in national forests, national parks. So yeah, I would start with AmeriCorps, and we've had many students go through this program and have absolutely loved it, whether it's budget driven or just a love for the outdoors or more career focused. They've absolutely loved it.
And if your student's interested in being, physical and moving big rocks around and building trails, or if you're interested in working in like one of the hut system areas within like the White Mountains in New Hampshire, there's also great positions for folks to be involved in these parks in different ways than just like the law enforcement aspect of being a park ranger, right? That's essentially what they are, is law enforcement. And so to be a ranger is great, but there's educational positions, there's physical conservation trail building positions, there's more hospitality positions. So lots of different ways that you could build experience to ultimately then apply for a park job.
Awesome. And last one, where are good examples of programs appropriate for youth with developing executive function skills? It's not, and same parent says that she loved her AmeriCorps year.
Oh,
That's
that's
awesome.
great.
So
Yeah.
if this parent could just, are you asking for a program that will develop their executive functioning skills, or a program for somebody whose executive functioning skills are developing, right? It's getting close to my bedtime, so.
But in the meantime, I'll mention while that parent weighs into your question is, I mean, Jason and I are big fans of the Gap Year Association. It's not going to be specific to students, with executive functioning or other learning differences. But we'll have so it's gapyearassociation.org.
Got it. Yep. I'll put it up.
And the website they are the nationally accrediting body of all things gap year. And there are 20 plus accredited programs. It's a great place to start. Again, they won't necessarily, some of them, you might find one like Ingenuity Year.
I was wondering, is that still a thing?
Yeah.
And Broad Futures.
And I think Broad Futures is accredited,
right?
Yep.
And then it'll be in the mix with other, programs without that designation. But again, as we've said, we have found that programs that don't necessarily outright state that they are appropriate for students with learning disabilities will also be quite suitable, but it's a real case by case. And that brings us back to that transparent conversation, family and program and consultant, to explore kind of the needs, the goals, what the program can do, what the student's capable of, what the hopes are, to kind of properly assess the suitability. But I think that's a great website to start, and loads of data. A lot of the data that we cite is posted there, and lots of other great things.
Got it. All right. I posted Dynamy, Gap Year Association, Broad Futures. Was there another one that used to be in Massachusetts?
Yeah. And
Innovative Labs.
Yeah. And they're moving to a virtual format currently, which is really disappointed. Yeah.
Wow. What a bummer. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, for those who didn't know what it was before, Innovation Labs. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the parent said either of those answers would work. Okay. Let me just get this in here. Oh, and that answer covers it. Okay. So I think it's time to wrap up. So let me thank you again. You guys are so generous in doing this every year. For folks who are watching us live, if you have friends who miss this will get up on my YouTube channel under LD Advisory in a day or two. Don't miss your opportunity to connect with Jane and Jason. If you're watching this on YouTube, I will put the link for their site in the comments there or in the post details there. Anything else you want to share before we log off here?
Thanks for having us. And I think, again, both as professionals, but also as parents of a differently abled learner, we know how scary it can be to leave the comforts, the support that we've been moving through a long journey with. And also really believe in the quality of experiences and programs and educators that are out there to help carry the torch into the next phase. And that I think gap year is a wildly suitable option for a student who hasn't necessarily had that easily found traditional success in a classroom setting, are potentially as likely, if not more likely, to experience tremendous success on a gap year in preparation for what's to come. So really just thrilled that there are people here curious and want to learn more, and to assure you from our perspective as both parent and people who've been in the field for a long time, that there's just a treasure trove of things to discover in a gap year space if you keep investigating. So,
well, that is true. And it's so important to remember too, that there is a lot of options out there. So we have some very nice comments here. This was really informative. Some folks are looking forward to connecting with you. So we will log off of Facebook and say goodnight to everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.